Like if it's longer, it's longer, you know? I like to go with the flow.
Yeah, amazing.
Okay. So if you're ready, and I do my audio separate. So if you're wondering what I'm doing audio separately
Okay.
because Zoom doesn't have the best quality
Yeah, for sure.
audio. All right. If you are ready, in 3, 2, 1. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sandy K Nutrition, Health and Lifestyle Queen. Today with me, I have Kashif Khan, and he's the CEO and founder of the DNA Company. He is also a biohacker, a celebrity longevity coach, and the author of The DNA Way: Unlock the Secrets of Your Genes to Reverse Disease, Slow Aging, and Achieve Optimal Wellness. And it's also featuring a foreword by Dave Asprey, by the way. With the largest study of its kind globally, Kashif and his team have developed a functional approach to DNA interpretation, overlaying environment, nutrition, and lifestyle on the genetic blueprint to create personalized health outcomes for those that they serve. The DNA Company's functional approach to understanding DNA has made a genomic science more accessible and understandable for everyday consumers. And as a result, Kashif has successfully transformed the DNA Company from a biotech startup to a $100 million company. And today we're going to talk about how anyone and everyone can use their own genetic blueprint to reverse chronic disease, slow aging. And guys, I'm all about this. It's like we need to just live a better life. For me, it's all about health span, not lifespan. And this is really an important tool to be able to do so. So, with that, welcome, Kashif.
Pleasure. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm really happy to talk to you because, as you know, I've done this myself as well.
I have your
And yes, you do. You have my data. But before we get into the juicy stuff, I have to ask you why? Why such a massive interest in this industry?
Yeah, so that why is a big question because I don't come from the industry, which usually doesn't add up to be a biotech entrepreneur when you have zero business doing that because you have no experience or education in it. It like most functional medicine stories, the good ones at least, it was driven by my own personal need. I was sick, right? So I had multiple chronic conditions, eczema to the point where I couldn't open my left eye. It was literally like sealed shut. I had autoimmunity, which led to psoriasis all over my body. Migraines, which were the worst part. That's the eczema, the psoriasis, I fought through it. The migraines, I couldn't. I was not functional. I couldn't work. And that's what really pushed me to go to the doctor, right? This is what men do is you keep going until you can't function, and then you go to the doctor. So the what really stood out for me is I couldn't get the answer to why. And keep in mind, this was at the age of 38. I had never been sick before, never had a reason to spend time in a clinic. And I thought you're supposed to ask, what did I eat wrong? What did I breathe wrong? What did I do wrong? But I learned you're just supposed to get told, here's what you have is called, and here's the pill you're supposed to take. And that didn't add up to me because why did all these things happen at the same time? So, anyways, fast forward, I started to learn through integrative and functional medicine in my own research and ultimately discovered that there was pages of my human genome that were entirely missing. So sections of code that were just not there. So there were certain biological processes that I just didn't do. And in the same context where I was eating the same food, breathing the same air, under the same stress or the same sleep as my business partners and peers, I was the one that got sick because those inputs were not appropriate for me. And if I give you one example, and by the way, this is all of what led me to handing the keys of my marketing company to my business partner and saying, you keep this. I found my legacy. I got to work on this because this is far too impactful for me to ignore, and that's why I built the company. But as an example, there's a gene called GSTM1, which is a primary first line of defense for the gut and detoxifier of the gut. And so while I was working in downtown Toronto and eating these lunches with customers every day, thinking that they were healthy, I didn't think about the packaging, the coloring, the processing chemicals that weren't listed on the menu, right? And my gut had zero ability, which my peers didn't have this challenge, to filter and prevent those toxins and insults from entering the bloodstream, causing ongoing inflammation, leading to all of what I experienced. This is one of many parts of the solution, but it was one of the big ones. And that one thing mattered for me, but didn't matter for the people around me. So just that's what led me to, wow, I got myself healthy. I got my arthritic mother out of bed and going to the gym. I got my anxiety induced niece out of the clinic and to school with straight A's now. Everyone needs this. And I just forged ahead from there.
I love it because you know, similar to me, it's our experiences, our life experiences that really fuel our passion to
Yeah.
just kind of live out our purpose, right? So I think genetics is really a difficult concept for many to understand because they feel, and when I say they, I'm just talking about the general public.
Hmm.
They feel that there's nothing you can do. You're doomed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I've recorded so many shows on genetics, on biological age versus chronological age, and all of these things that just say, hey, you have a choice and you have a say. It's just that if you don't have that knowledge, you don't have the power to do so.
This was a big motivating factor for me in terms of why I took on this mission and purpose, let's say. And it was that I discovered that this was the tool that I needed to heal myself, but the tool was so hard to use. And the scientists that developed the tool didn't really get what you could glean out of it, right? They were limited in their thinking because it was all disease centric. Whereas, you know, hey, you have an 80% chance of Alzheimer's because of this gene, which means you're probably going to give me Alzheimer's with the anxiety that you just induced for the next 30 years waiting to see, right?
Yeah.
Is that should just be a priority to then signal I have a gene that doesn't function properly. So there's a certain job that my body doesn't do well, whatever that job is. And there's many, many jobs our bodies are doing for making hormones and neurochemicals, etc. Now I can start to prioritize here's the habits, environment, nutrition, lifestyle that if I were to adopt are almost certainly going to make me sick. And here's the habits that if I were to adopt will almost certainly prevent this problem from happening. And genetics kind of ended at genetics, which is just prioritizing. Here's the job my body doesn't do. I now need to prioritize this. This is my why. This is the thing that's going to lead me to my problem. And I need to now focus and personalize all of my choices every day. Every choice you make, from eating to breathing to talking to somebody, is a choice towards health or a choice away from it.
Hmm.
Constant, right? So if you always make the right choice, the outcome is going to be incredible. And we're saying your DNA should prescribe what those choices are in all of what you do. And we now know how to do that.
I just thought of something because you said the choices. I'm like, I was at a big party up north this past weekend, a 50th birthday, and the choices that I made were not necessarily the ones that would be good for my genetics. However, I'm also a big believer in, once in a blue moon, hey,
Yeah.
we all got to let loose. So,
So to that, the one thing I should say about that is that's the one challenge is people don't want to give things up. And I understand that it's like, well, I want to live, right?
yeah.
So, and the choice isn't necessarily do this, don't do that. It's more like there's two dials to turn. Here's a job my body doesn't do. So here's the things I need to eliminate, right? But I don't want to eliminate it. Okay, well, here's what you need to add to support the biological function. And you can turn either one of those dials, right? So for me, I could either choose to not all eat all these foods because of my gut detox, or I could add digestive enzymes, add some glutathione, add some gut lining support, and then go ahead and eat all the nonsense that I want to eat. I'm not suggesting that's the best path, but you can go in either direction, and you're constantly sort of tuning both of these dials.
Yes. Trust me, this is the majority of what I do with my family because they don't want to listen to me. And, they're like, whatever. Like, it's almost like their way of rebelling. They're like, my mom's a nutritionist, so I'm going to eat shit instead. This is my life, Kashif. So I'm like, okay, you want to eat those things. I know your genetics because I've done a lot of work with genetics. I'm not a genetics counselor per se, but I have a lot of experience and knowledge in genetics. And I will say one thing, I have never seen such a comprehensive report that I received from the DNA company. And I still learned a ton of new things that I know we're going to kind of touch on some of these things later. But what is it that the DNA company does differently? Because everyone's going to say, well, why don't I just go and get a 23andMe done?
Yeah. So, and that goes again back to when I was sick, what is the tool that I wished existed at that time? Based on my experience of trying to understand genetics, how should it have been parceled up? What's the context? And it wasn't like that. And so I forged ahead and built it in the way that I wished it was, as an outsider, not as a scientist, not as a PhD clinician, but as a user of the product. Here's what it should look like. And the big challenge is it should be easy, meaning I shouldn't need a PhD to tell me. First of all, I don't need to know what version of what gene I have. It should not be a test and report. It should be insights as opposed to data. Data is dumb. It's a bunch of information. If I don't know what question to ask, it's useless. I need the insight, which is not here's the DRD2 gene, which means you don't have efficient dopamine receptors. It means you're more prone to lean towards addiction. And so you need to fuel your day with reward, with achievement, so that you don't lean on pleasure. That's a
Mm.
valuable insight versus you have a specific version of the DRD2 gene. That's the information I wish I was given. So the report, like you said, isn't so much a report as it is a digital experience that kind of speaks to all these problems from anxiety, depression, hormones to cardiovascular health to metabolizing fats to hair and skin. These are the problems we're actually trying to solve. And the genes will inform why we would have problems. What's the biological failure? And then more importantly, what choices to make? What are the solutions? If I don't also tell you what to do about it, just telling you the problem just leaves you stuck, right? So, and it was broken up into a few portions. Insights, here's the problems. Then the genetics of I wish somebody could explain it to me. So we built an AI that actually reads the data to you as if a PhD was sitting in front of you, and then recontextualizing the problem. So, for example, cardiovascular disease is not a disease of the heart, it's a disease of the arteries. And we need to understand that. And once you understand that, you start to make the right choices to prevent that disease. So, there's a lot of video that help people learn all that. And this is exactly what I wished I had, you know, and it was designed that way selfishly by me, but I do believe that's what people will need.
And see, that is probably the key to building it, because you're not looking at it from a scientist perspective. You're looking at it from the perspective of, okay, I have all of these issues. I want to make it so clear that there's really no question on what I can do to better my wellness overall from all angles. And I always say that too. I'm always like, listen, we need Western medicine. We need Eastern medicine. We need naturopathic. We need, when you marry all of these things, you can really optimize your wellness, not from just one perspective.
Yeah, you need the acute response, right? You need to like, and there's kind of three phases I see people go through. There's the let's deal with the emergency. And that might mean medication, right?
Right. Right.
Then there's healing. There's I've now fixed the problem. Truly, I've understood the root cause and I don't have the problem anymore. And I was able to unravel it. And that's more like you said, the naturopathy, the supplements, the food, etc. Like what caused this. Then there's optimization. Hey, I got myself to a better baseline. I'm now going to add 10 years. I'm going to start thinking about longevity. How do I live to 120 and ride my bicycle? Right. And here's the funny thing is when you look at the innate structure of DNA, there's these caps on the end called telomeres. And I know you've done some testing for this, right? So
Yeah.
these telomeres are like these bumpers that protect your DNA from damage. And aging is DNA damage. It's oxidation and breakdown of the DNA in the cells. So the telomeres are supposed to protect that. When you look at the physical structure, they look like they're designed to last 120 years. That's what we know, which means we should live to 120. And it's the choices that we make that take years away. The reason you die at 60 or 78 or 92 is because you took years away from that 120, from the food you ate, the lack of exercise, the whatever you did, right? We should all get to that number with good health.
Mm. Yeah, I did that test. I think it was when I was 50, so 3 years ago, and I believe my telomeres were that of a 38-year-old.
Wow.
Not bad. Not bad, right, Kasha?
Yeah, you're doing good.
I'm doing okay considering I've already had cancer, I'm like that's whatever. That's the past. We won't go there. Okay. The one thing that I feel we have to explain, so what's the difference between genetics and epigenetics?
Yeah. So genetics, and there's something in the middle there, which is functional genomics, right? So genetics is what people think genetics is, which is here's a gene, you have an 80% chance of breast cancer. Here's the BRCA gene, for example.
Right.
BRCA gene. And let's use this to paint the full picture, right? So the BRCA gene is we found a gene variant, go cut your fallopian tubes off and cut your breasts off because we see elevated risk of cancer. The BRCA gene does not cause cancer and does not elevate cancer risk. But this is genetics, because genetics, again, is disease centric. You're taking people in disease setting and trying to find that needle in the haystack gene that equals that, right? Functional genomics is here's pathways and systems. We already understand human biology, and single genes aren't doing single jobs. Your hormones isn't one gene. Your hormones is many, many genes in this cascade, from progesterone converting into testosterone, converting into estrogen, and then detoxifying them and clearing them. There's a whole chain of jobs that happen interlinked, and you have to understand them all. So that's functional genomics. How do I, as opposed to just like medicine is, here's what disease you have, and here's what pill you have to take. Functional medicine is, why did you get sick?
Yeah.
So genetics is here's a gene that we believe equals a disease. Functional genomics is why does the disease happen? What can you do to stop it and prevent it? Now, the epigenetics of it is, and I'm going to use breast cancer to paint a full picture of this. The epigenetics is now that I know my functional genomics, here's the pathways and systems. So I know that priority, that red flag, that hole that I need to plug in my boat where the water's leaking in, right? What is it? Is it the water leaking in? Is it lack of wind? What is the input that is causing my problem? Lifestyle, environment, nutrition. Those are the three big buckets. Environment is everything that I breathe, that I'm exposed to, my pesticides, my cleaning chemicals, my mold. Lifestyle is, my sleep, my relationships, the way I exercise, everything that I do. And nutrition, of course, is what I eat, including my supplementation. So now let's use breast cancer to paint a full picture. BRCA is you have a gene, go cut your breasts off.
Mm-hmm.
Done, right? That's where we end the story. Functional genomics is BRCA doesn't cause cancer. It's a tumor suppressor. Let's look at the job as opposed to the data. The job is this gene is supposed to fix cancer. And if you have a bad version of the gene, you don't do a good job of repair. Didn't cause cancer, you're just less likely to survive because you don't repair it well. It also repairs cells and damaged DNA, repairs a lot of things, right? So some women, now we have to get to the functional, well, why did it happen? Some women are much more estrogen dominant. They make far more estrogen than they need. And genetically, this is very easy to determine in the hormone cascade. So that's step 1 of 3. I make a lot of estrogen. I'm estrogen dominant. Some women in their monthly cycle convert that estrogen into a metabolite that is toxic before the cycle, meaning that it causes inflammation. There's 3 potential options: 2-hydroxyestrogen, 4-hydroxyestrogen, and 16. 2 is good, clean stuff. 4 and 16 are toxic inflammatory insults. A lot of women make these 2. So now step 2 of 2. Step 3 of 3 is now that I know I'm estrogen dominant, make the toxic version, well, how well do I detoxify it? The same genes that do other detoxification pathways like glutathione, antioxidation, methylation, which we're going to talk about, these detox pathways also clear this toxin that we make, not only that we intake, that we breathe and eat, but that we actually make. So if you are estrogen dominant and you are estrogen toxic and you don't have the best detox pathways, here's all of a sudden this avatar that speaks to the why, right?
Mm.
This persona. And it's, as you can see, it's highly functional and system based. It's not a single gene because the body doesn't work that way. It's more of a symphony, it's an orchestra, multiple pieces interconnected. Now, even then, this woman may not get sick. This woman may decide, like 85% of North American women, to go on a birth control pill for 5 to 10 years and add more estrogen into that funnel of estrogen toxicity. Or she may not understand hormone disruption, her Teflon coated frying pan, her pesticides in her grass, her what's in her water, all of these things that are not yet understood by a lot of people that are mimicking and mirroring hormones and causing more estrogen toxicity. Some women don't know that when they go into bioidentical hormone replacement, which is a great thing to do, if you're not precise about where to intervene and what to take, you may be fueling that 4-hydroxyestrogen that's toxic. For example, a lot of women are told to take estradiol, which is great. It's good stuff. But if you're, I think it's a CYP1B1 gene which converts into 4-hydroxy, it directly takes estradiol and plows it all into 4-hydroxy, which is the toxic stuff. So if you have the fast version of the gene, you have to alter what your hormone replacement therapy looks like. So now
Right.
here's the persona, here's the epigenetics, the question you asked. And without the epigenetics, the persona didn't matter because there was no inputs that would cause the problem, right? Now you go back to practical context, which is a third layer we don't talk about. Context is most breast cancer happens around the menopause age.
Yep.
All, but most, because you no longer have a menstrual cycle and you're no longer getting rid of this monthly toxic insult. And your body saying, well, I still see this stuff. And wait a second, now it's in my blood. There's not going anywhere. I want to protect my organs and I want to protect my vasculature, my veins. So I'm going to go store this stuff in fat. And where do women have fat? Hips and breasts, right? And there's a few other places, but there's a lot of fat in the breast. And you have all these glands and ducts for milk delivery that, as a cellular structure, were not designed to cope with inflammation. Your lungs, your gut, these are all filters, right? These ducts, no, they were not designed for this. All of a sudden, cellular degradation, breakdown, mutation, cancer, right? That's the point, after all of what we just talked about, that BRCA is supposed to get to work. And BRCA is supposed to start fixing things. And we oversimplify in genetics, BRCA cut your breasts off, BRCA cut your fallopian tubes out. Versus why? Versus testing young women who are teenagers and giving them an instruction manual saying, here's the exact habits you should adopt to never get breast cancer. It's
Yeah.
not hereditary. Your habits are misaligned with your biology. And that's a perfect example of genetics is not enough. Functional genomics will give you the priorities, but without dealing with your epigenetics, the inputs, you're not going to solve the problem truly. You need to know it all. So that's the fulsome answer.
That is a fabulous answer because you really explain how one gene isn't
Yeah.
going to be responsible for something horrible like a cancer diagnosis,
Yes.
right? And that we do have say, Kashif. We
Yes.
have say. And it's if we don't have the knowledge. So, for example, you probably know this, the Fox OE1 gene. I know I have that, and it can be both positive and negative,
Mm.
right? Like it can be positive in the sense it's great for longevity and all of that, but guess what? It's also responsible for, I think it's well, I'm pretty sure it's thyroid cancer from the last research that I read. And what did I have? I had thyroid cancer, but
Mm.
I had no idea how to support myself. And you spoke to this. Everyone has different resiliency, but when we don't know, you know, there's millions of women who give birth to babies around the world. And you have stress, you have low sleep, you have, you basically put your needs aside for this new human being. Well, some women can get postpartum thyroiditis, some women can get sick, some don't, right? I happen to be the one that the stress got to me, and it was years and years of stress, right? So I love how you explain that whole BRCA gene, because just because you have it doesn't mean that you're going to get cancer. It's what you do, what you don't do
Yeah.
that can really define what's going to
Yeah.
happen.
And we think of it as a breast cancer gene, and we cut breasts off, but you didn't get rid of the estrogen toxicity and the habits, so you're just going to get cancer somewhere else.
Yes.
Right? We think of cancer as isolated, lung cancer, heart cancer. No, it's the hardware failure is where the inflammation hit first, right? Inflammation is probably everywhere, but the breast and this, again, the cellular structure, that's where it's going to sort of fail first. But if you get rid of them, it may take longer to fail somewhere else, but you eventually will. So you have to deal with the root cause.
Menopause is an interesting time for a lot of women because a lot of things, a lot of biological changes occur. And I guess this is the time, where you can see inflammation, right?
Yep.
It's like the body's trying to almost like rejig and figure out how to, not be able to procreate anymore and not to do the things that you probably had the ability to do most of your life,
Yep.
right?
And this is actually exactly why. This is literally, this may be the biggest mystery just unsolved, just being solved right here, right?
Yeah, let's do it.
Why, why do women go into menopause? This is exactly why. Because all of what it takes in order to have fertility is toxic. It is inflammatory. And when you get to the age of 30, you start to lose your mitochondria. By the time you're 70 years old, you've lost 70% of your mitochondria. So the resilience of the cell is gone, right? When you get to 50, it highly accelerates. Women age more between the age of 40 and 50 than any other decade in their life, like physically, internally, right?
Yep.
So all of this adds up to the thing that I needed in order to be fertile is also highly toxic. And that's the way the system happens to work. I don't need it anymore. Seemingly, maybe some women want to get pregnant at 60, but for the most part, don't need it anymore. So why have this toxic insult when I no longer have the cellular resilience, when I no longer have sort of the lack of inflammation because these things compound over time, right? When the DNA is now damaged and oxidized because things compound over time. So your body puts you into menopause to protect you,
Yes.
truly to protect you because you don't need the fertility anymore and you don't need these toxic byproducts of estrogen flowing through your body on a monthly basis. It's truly a protective measure. And we don't understand, again, the why, the root cause of menopause. So we don't treat it properly. We think of it as a condition. We think of it because if you're not, if the terrain is not healthy, menopause is a horrible experience. The same woman that had a horrible experience could have had a very pleasant experience if the terrain was ready for it,
Yes.
right? And by understanding your hormone cascade, you know exactly where to intervene. If you're more androgenized, you make a lot more dihydrotestosterone, for example, which is a potent manly man version of testosterone. And some cues for that might be acne, hair loss. Um, Maybe you have less fat on your body. That's more androgenization, right? But that's going to cause you a different set of problems during menopause versus the woman who's more estrogenized or estrogen toxic. Different set of problems. That's why there's nearly 100 menopause symptoms now. There used to be 40, then 60, then 80. Now there's like 100 because women are not all the same. There's
Yes.
many different profiles of what your hormones could look like and many different symptoms. And this is why if we take all of the work that we've done with many thousands of patients, the area that needs the most support and work is everything around female hormone health. And I scream this from the rooftops because it's the delta value between what someone was told of the doctor versus what we're able to do when we meet somebody, it's ridiculous, right? So anyway, so that's what I would have to say about menopause is that it's a needed protective measure if you understand what's happening in your hormone cascade in order for allow you fertility, which you no longer need. Your body is just trying to protect you.
But then it also can put you at risk. So you want to hear this? This is really interesting. I'm sure you've heard this. I interviewed Phil Mikens from Profound Health a while ago, in the UK. He
Right.
does the peptide bioregulator. So he's big on that. Anyway, we were talking about menopause, and he was saying the one big, and I don't think it's proven, Kashif, but the one big reason why women jump to the same risk as men for heart disease is because she no longer bleeds.
Mhm.
And the blood, you kind of mentioned it, in and of itself is like, it's like a cleanse, right?
Yep.
And one of the things that he said for men is to start donating blood regularly.
So when it comes to cardiovascular disease, the implication is very different. We think of it as a male disease because men live with cardiovascular disease.
Yeah.
66% of women will die on their first cardiovascular event with
Wow.
zero symptoms. They didn't even know they were sick. And this is why we don't think of it as a women's disease, because women don't survive cardiovascular, they just die.
Wow.
Right. And so, but men continue to live with it. So we see men with it and we think it's a man's problem.
Yeah.
It's the same inflammatory insults of the endothelium. We'll dive into cardiovascular to paint another picture for people.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's so women just don't survive that well because of the dual thing there. So you're combating not only all this inflammatory insult that men are dealing with, but also the estrogen toxicity, right? And then you get into menopause, and estrogen, by the way, is protective of the heart and the bone, etc. And you lose that, and then so the protection is also gone. And so, yeah, women just don't fare so well. This is also why 80% of Alzheimer's cases are in women. The research dollars are all spent on men, which is why the answers don't work for women. But the cases are all in women. It's because of this cofactor, the estrogen toxicity, the changes in hormones that are so profound. In men, there's a constant slow trickle. For women, it's just a flip, right? Major change. And so that's the difference. So now when you look at cardiovascular disease, we don't think of it genetically as a heart disease. We look at a set of genes in the 9p21 locus, they're called, and we can determine if here's your artery, this tube, right? There's four major arteries around the heart. The inner lining is called the endothelium. So that inner lining, we can genetically predict what quality it is, how resilient it is. And most of us are walking around with not the best quality hardware. Very few people have the ultra resilient stainless steel endothelium, which is why cardiovascular disease is so prolific. So what happens is you have this bad quality endothelium, you're not sick, you weren't born with a problem, but the inflammatory insults, including your toxic estrogen, keep causing inflammation here. And if you have bad hardware, that inflammation is going to happen a little faster. Now, the body will deploy cholesterol as a hormone to reduce the inflammation. That's the response. And when the cholesterol meets the free radicals and toxins that cause the inflammation, it in itself oxidizes and hardens and starts to deposit and build up. And eventually your doctor will tell you you have a cholesterol problem. You need
Hmm.
a pill, a statin, right? When the cholesterol wasn't a problem, it was the thing that your body was doing to deal with the inflammation from your habits. Bad hardware combined with the wrong habits equals inflammation. And now, if we look at you, for example, I'm going to poke at your data for a second.
Sure.
You have the, one second. You have the worst possible ability to deal with airborne or inhalation-based toxins. So mold, pesticides, chemicals. You walk into a factory, you're probably going to get a little bit of brain fog or not feel so well. So for you, again, prioritizing. You should not be golfing 4 days a week, breathing in pesticides or gardening with chemicals or working with cleaners in your home. For you, that's where the inflammation is going to come from. For
Mm.
somebody else, it doesn't matter. They might have the good version of this gene. You have the worst possible, which means minus 70% ability to prevent these toxins from entering the bloodstream. Now, phase two, once they're in the blood, there's a second glutathione process. And this was glutathione, by the way, that I was talking about in the lungs. There's a secondary glutathione process for which you're actually missing a gene.
Oh, I
Either,
saw that.
yeah.
Yeah, I saw that.
So either mom or dad didn't give it to you. So once this minus 70%, everything leaches in, for what gets in, your minus 50% ability to clear and cope and get rid of it. So inhalation-based toxins are a big problem for you. Now, fast forward to I now live in a city and there's pollution and there's chemicals and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's probably not the best outcome. And you go back to those two dials. I have to eliminate and I have to support. I need to add glutathione. But now, if we get precise, you taking glutathione directly may not be the best answer because your GSTT1 gene, which instructs glutathione, which is why you don't clear toxins from the blood so well, is you're missing one copy. So the instruction's broken. So if you were to take straight glutathione, you might also start binding onto minerals and nutrients that you actually need because the glutathione is misinstructed. So you need more precursors, NAC, selenium, alpha lipoic acid, right? The things that just kind of get to work. You can build up glutathione, but if you just take a bottle with a regular dose, it's not going to do so well for you. So it's like the cascade again of what's the disease we're dealing with? Cardiovascular. Okay, what's my hardware? Not so good. And by the way, yours is um, not so good. Right? So it's not the best, but it's kind of call it minus 70%. So there's six
Okay.
indications we look for bad genetics, and 4 out of the 6 you have the bad genetics, right? So not so good hardware. So step one, here's the red flag. I have bad cardiovascular genetics. Step two, what would cause the inflammation? Inhalation-based toxins. Step three, what do I do about it? I shouldn't take glutathione. I need to take precursors like NAC selenium, and I need to remove airborne toxins from my life. That's the cascade. That's the prescription for you. And now you can unpack any condition in the same way.
That is so cool. And it's funny that you say this because this is going back 15 years, no more, even more, like close to 18 years. You know what it was like from here. You couldn't find non-chemical options. You couldn't find, but I had a daughter who was a baby who had severe eczema, and I was looking, and back then I was like, Melaleuca, that was all we had. I don't know if you remember Melaleuca.
Yeah.
It's going back, but this is really, really good to know. So things like infrared sauna are really good for me,
Mm,
right?
yep, for sure. Your if I were to look at your mitochondrial function, it's also a little off. So you actually need constant mitochondrial support. And infrared sauna is a major booster and upregulator of what we call mitophagy, the development of new mitochondria and enlarging the existing mitochondria, which makes you more resilient and slows aging way down, right? So sauna, breath holding exercises, supplements like vitamin E, tocotrienols, ubiquinol, CoQ10, urolithin A. There's again, same thing. Mitochondrial function is off. Here's the potential problems. Here's what we need to do about it. And sauna
Yeah.
is the best thing you can do.
Yeah. We built a therapy room quite a few years ago instead of a home gym. We were
Yeah.
like, no, let's build. So we have red light panel, we have far infrared sauna, and although I have been really bad with doing that in the summer, it's like that whole, I'm going through menopause. Like I want to be so hot all the time. I'm like over being in September, I'll get much better with it. This is fascinating. You know what we need to talk about is methylation,
Yeah.
because it's a little bit complicated to understand when you read it in a scientific sense what methylation is. So let's try and break it down so it's really easy for people to get what methylation is.
So there's 3 layers to it and 3 contexts that you have to understand it in.
Okay.
The technical answer is methylation is the sending of a methyl group to make a non-water soluble toxin water soluble. So it's just converting something from non-water soluble to water soluble to allow you to detoxify it and essentially pee it out. So
Okay.
that's taking all the complicated science and telling you what you needed to know, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Now, the 2 other pieces to it are what is the outcome? Think about your methylation as your anti-inflammatory response. So everything we talked about up until now was why do I get inflammation and what diseases is it going to cause? But we do have a natural defense called methylation, which helps us fight inflammation through this process of, methylating things. And then you now know which supplements you need to support, whether it's a B12, a B9, a folic acid, folinic acid. Your genes will prescribe that. The third layer to methylation, which is not spoken of enough, but a very interesting layer, is like you said, your genes are constantly expressing. So here's your genetics. You have a report that tells you you have this version of this gene, this version of this gene. You have the certain version of the CYP19A1 gene. So this is how fast you convert testosterone into estrogen, for example. Now I know that if I add DIM, which is a broccoli extract, it will actually slow that gene down or speed it up, right? That's gene expression, which means I haven't changed the gene. I still have that version of the gene, but I've temporarily caused it to change how fast or slow it's operating based on an epigenetic input. Methylation will determine how efficiently you do that. So if you're a bad methylator, you're not responding to inputs efficiently,
Yeah.
right? But that's a whole stressor on your body. It could be good depending on what problem you're dealing with, or it could be really bad depending on what you're dealing with. So when it comes to stress or it comes to sleep or whatever, this is why some people will tell you that with their habits, their sleep quality will swing up and down a lot based on
Yeah.
what they do, because they don't cope or align quickly. So this is methylation, anti-inflammatory by the virtue of sending a methyl group to make things water soluble, and by using B vitamins to sort of turn dials on your genes, and then managing expression so that your body is constantly reacting to all cues the way that it should be. If there's a tiger running towards you, you need the right hormones and neurochemicals to run. That's genetic expression, right? So how efficiently do you do that?
And I know my methylation sucks. I I'm a very poor methylator. And I also have, you mentioned a couple of other things in there because I know my report touched on it, is sleep and stress. So I kind of know a lot of this about myself, which I've learned through fumbling through health issues prior to getting into this whole industry. And that's
Yeah.
why I'm here, right? So I know I have to do a lot to support this methylation cycle, which in turn can help other things improve as well. Does that
Yep.
make sense?
For sure. It's this foundational process that supports everything. There's a few foundational things. Methylation, vitamin D, of
Mhm.
the 22,000 genes that make up your genome, 2,000 require adequate vitamin D to function properly,
Yes.
right? So there's a few foundational things you need. Methylation is one, vitamin D is one, hormones is another, and then your glutathione, and detox pathways. These are key to innate cellular health and just staying young and youthful and disease free. Um, and then we start. So you mentioned, your sleep and your stress, etc. So we can look at neurochemicals and we can start to understand, okay, I got all this stuff working, but I still feel like this, right? And why doesn't that person feel like this? And why is it when I talk to this person, we have two very different perspectives? So if I were to look at your neurochemical map, the thing that stands out there when you talk about sleep and stress, etc., is your adrenaline response is somewhat dysregulated, which means when there's anything impactful and there's emotion that's elicited, you're much more likely to bind that feeling that was caused from that. And more specifically, the negative stimulus, which means trauma, right? You will bind negative stimulus. So the next time something like that happens again, it's as if you're just continuing from the last time, holding the grudge. Now try speaking to someone who doesn't do that genetically, who says, this is not such a big deal. What are you talking about? This has nothing to do with last time. And you're like, this is last time, right? Last time is not over. It's just a continuation, which is truly what you're feeling, because your body, when there's that impact, will imprint, like tattoo into your memory, the feeling, not only the information, but the feeling. Now, again, there's no good or bad. There's context of, I'm a healer. I have EQ. I have empathy. I remember what it feels like, and I can meet people where they're at. Then there's a context of going to speak to the hubby about, why does this keep happening? And the hubby saying, it doesn't keep happening. I don't know what you're talking about. Two very different perspectives, right? Because one's remembering the information, one's remembering the feeling, and the feeling maybe has nothing to do with this current moment. Your neurochemical clearance is also really quick. So not only are you remembering all this feeling and imprinting it, but it didn't last long enough. And so there's some confusion in the recall. You weren't in the moment for long enough to really get the details. You remember what it felt like. It's like, I saw that person's grumpy face, and what did I do? Because they remind me of the last time they were grumpy, and last time it was my fault. And now I'm like, what did I do? Even though I did nothing at all. But because the recall is so quick, the moment, I should say, the clearance is quick, you're not remembering it properly. And this can create even more friction, where somebody says, no, this has happened. And you're like, no, it happened like this. And you're truly remembering it completely different.
Oh, that's intense,
Yeah.
Kashif. It's like you were in my kitchen last night. No, I'm just kidding. Between me and my husband having our conversation. No, I'm laughing at that because I'm fortunate because he is more of a chill, easygoing, things slide off his back. So it's good. It's trust me, it's good. Um, but what can I do with like, I mean, I take a lot.
Yeah.
I take a lot, and a lot of the things that were because I study this stuff, right? And I've been in this industry for a while. So I take a lot, but maybe tell the audience, like, just because I know I'm not the only one.
Yep. So when it comes to everything mood and behavior, I don't believe there's a good or a bad. And I didn't believe this in the beginning, by the way. We used to use words like anxiety, depression, and we were trying to fix all these problems. And when I started talking to patients, well, I'm not a clinician, I'm not a scientist, but I wanted to talk to patients to learn how to apply this stuff.
Yeah.
Because I figured an outsider coming in is going to see things that the scientists with their blinders on that think we have to think they won't see it, right? So
Right.
I've dealt with hundreds of patients where I've literally dove into their genetics as a genetic counselor, them knowing that this is just research. And the thing that I noticed after some time is there's no such thing as bad mood and behavior genetics. They're just context. Everybody is wired with a genetic superpower when it comes to the way they think. Sometimes it feels like kryptonite if you're in the wrong context. And then you start to use words like anxiety and depression and addiction instead of achievement and joy and all of the good stuff, right? So take me, for example, and I'll speak to your issue.
Yeah.
Uh, and so when it comes, just to make this clear for people, so dopamine is that chemical that allows you to experience pleasure or reward, and not so much experience it, but get the satisfaction. So whenever you eat the tasty pizza or achieve something at work, pleasure or reward, dopamine is deployed. There's receptors in your brain that have to bind it. There's genes that determine how dense your receptors are. So to what degree or what level of intensity did you feel the pleasure? And then there's chemicals around clearance to get you back to normal. So my density is slim to none. I have the worst possible density of receptors. So it's very hard for me to experience pleasure and reward. I have the fastest possible neurochemical clearance, which means it doesn't last. So I'm prime wired for depression because I don't feel and it doesn't last, so the world sucks, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yes. But if I find something that gives me pleasure, I'm going to become addicted because all of a sudden it's so good that I keep doing it. I keep doing it. I keep doing it. Or dopamine not only powers pleasure, but it also powers reward. So if I start experiencing reward from my work, I will become highly entrepreneurial and reward seeking. I've experienced all three of these things,
Yeah.
which is why I know that none of them need to happen. It's all based on context. Earlier in my life, growing up in poverty, I was depressed, right? And in between, where I didn't try because I was doing okay in work, I also became depressed because I stopped trying. There was a time when a friend gave me something for my birthday that he shouldn't have given me, and I became addicted,
Yeah.
right? And now that I have a purpose and my work is for purpose and not for profit, I'm highly reward seeking. And whatever I did yesterday is never good enough. And so I'm achievement, achievement, achievement. So for me, it becomes a choice. I now know that I am wired for what we call warrior genetics, front lines, trying hard and doing crazy things that nobody else is willing to do. Risk reward seeking behavior, right? Versus risk adversity. If I don't do that, I'm going to become depressed. Or something in the middle called addiction, which is I'm going to do it with the pleasure instead of the reward. So it becomes a choice. And for you, it's also a choice. For you, you've been armed with this tool of empathy, EQ, being able to work with people, understand them, this innate superpower, right? But in the wrong context, it becomes friction when you're talking to the wrong people about the wrong topic. So half of the problem is solved there, self-awareness. Here's the tool I've been given, and I now know, even in the wrong context, what this tool feels like. And I start to recognize those things. I no longer blame people. I just understand my place in this puzzle, right?
Mm.
And you start to be that person. and you thrive everywhere, even when it's a wrong context, because you start to take a step back and like, oh, I know what's going on here, right?
Yeah.
There are times where you just need to, like, for me, family vacation. How do I do that? Right? How do I lie on a beach when with this reward-seeking, addictive behavior that needs so much input? Well, I can take L-theanine to boost my dopamine levels and feel quote unquote normal, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can take supplements to slow down your calm. So it becomes a choice. Here's a tool, here's the goal. Now, what am I doing? Do I need to build another business? Then I'm wired for it. Just do what I do. Do I need to go to a wedding and relax? Okay, I might take some L-theanine, maybe some serotonin regulating supplements, and then all of a sudden I start to feel like the way I should feel for that context.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Because I think if people had more knowledge, they would really know how to tweak their happiness, their lives, their health, because there's just so many things. Like I've taken L-theanine before, um, because as you know, you've seen my genetics.
Yep.
I can have some issues with worrying, like especially, and then that gets into sleep issues for me.
Yep.
And sleepless nights are really not an option for me. I really value my sleep. So L-theanine can kind of help with that rumination too, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Um, I have a question. How come, and I don't know if this is just a lack of self-awareness or why this happens. Why do we see some of these things expressing much more around midlife?
Mm.
Like, is it because, and I often wonder this, like, when you're 20, everybody's out drinking and partying the same. Everyone looks the same. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden, you're 45, you've got a mortgage, you've got a tough marriage, you've got kids that are a problem, and you start to drink. And why is it that it just seems to express more around midlife?
Yeah. So there's a number of things happening. One thing is our ancestors didn't live to midlife. They died at 30 and 35, right? And now keep in mind when I say ancestors, our DNA is 250,000 years old. So we aren't grandma and grandpa. That's a misconception that, oh, I inherited my grandma's genes or whatever. Our DNA hasn't changed for a quarter million years, which means that you are wired. Now think about our current modern reality. 200 years of industrialization. There's been 10,000 years of modern agriculture, and there's another 240,000 years of history that we have to talk about the habits that our body still thinks that we are wired for. So when we wake up every morning, we wake up with our bodies thinking that we are cave people, right? So that's one.
Hmm.
Those people didn't live past 30 or 40 for the majority of that time.
Right.
Not because they weren't healthy, but because everybody got eaten or killed, or they weren't, there was no medication, all this type of stuff, right? So our hormones start to deplete at that age.
Yeah.
They start to follow our stem cells, and our ability to regenerate start to deplete at that age. Our mitochondria starts to deplete at that age, right? And all of a sudden you become an adult, right? So we don't have the resilience. And so when it comes to that same input, the stressor, that I had a certain testosterone level at 25, where I now have a very different testosterone level at 45, it's one will at 25, it would have induced a warrior response. At 45, it's going to induce a worrier response because
Mm.
the hormones, the context, and the terrain are now different. You're more estrogenized, which is going to lean more towards anxiety and worrying versus the testosterone, just go get it done. And this is why young people act like they're invincible because they truly think they are. Your mitochondria is it's flourishing at that time, right? It's dense, big, large, high in number. They start to deplete. And where do you have the highest density of mitochondria? Your heart, your brain, and your eyes. Brain is number two. So as you age, you're losing mitochondria in your brain, which means less resilient, less cognitive function, less tolerance of all of what's coming in.
Less tolerance.
Yeah, everything means more, right?
Mhm.
So our DNA hasn't changed, the instruction is the same, but the equipment has changed, right? The software, the genetic instruction is the same, but it's dealing with a different context. The terrain has changed, and we're just not as resilient. So this speaks to keep the body youthful, never stop going to the gym and lifting weights, never stop supporting your mitochondria with breath holding and red light, like you said, and sauna, and the right foods. Never add additional sources of oxidative damage to the DNA by eating garbage foods and not sleeping properly and all the things that age your DNA, right? So if you start to understand these habits, you start to understand how much we actually control disease being a choice and how we feel being a choice and at what pace we age being a choice, what our energy and libido levels are at different ages being a choice, right? So and it is all truly optional to some degree, right?
Yep.
uh if you're doing everything wrong, you're going to get to those problems faster. If you're doing everything right, they may never happen, the problem. So that's what it is that we are, as we age, the terrain changes and the same input means something different because you now have different hardware, different response. So let's keep that hardware youthful by adopting the right habits.
Yeah. That's very powerful. I have a question. What, and this is just speaking of mitochondria because it just came to mind. What are your thoughts on NAD? Just because everyone's talking about NAD for years now. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I think it works. I think that it's not the only solution. I just think that the reason it gets so much attention is because of the people that are involved, um, namely David Sinclair. There's a company
Yeah.
that's built around it. So it works. It does the job that it's supposed to do, and whatever people are claiming is true.
Yeah.
It maintains the youthfulness of the cell. It's not the only way to do it, but it is a good way to do it, right? So it works. I think there's a lot you can do to not react and mask, but prevent the damage to begin with. And if someone's talking to you about NAD without first explaining to you that there's been 144,000 chemicals added to humanity since the 1970s, the majority of which are in your food, and how do you prevent the even needing NAD? That should be the question, right? If you do everything right in terms of your choices, there's no cellular damage to deal with, right? It's never going to be zero, but there's no therapeutic need at that point, right? If we believe there's a cap of 120, and we know that there are people that have lived to 120, there are people, right, that have lived to that age, and they didn't take NAD. What
Yeah.
they did was they had really good relationships. This is one of the most important things. They did not have toxic relationships, and they had a small, tight-knit community of very high quality relationships, right? They moved a lot. They ate the right foods that were antioxidant in nature, that were prebiotic and probiotic in nature, they were fermented, they supported the gut. They are rich in micronutrients and minerals. This is another major problem, minerals that we don't get enough of, right? They enjoyed their work. Their vocation was their pleasure, right? So you start to look at the habits of the people that actually did live to 120, and most of them didn't take any supplements,
Right.
right? So, and they're genetically diverse. There wasn't some magic gene pool, right? It's their habit. This is why we have blue zones.
Yes.
It's because it's not the people of that zone, it's the habits of that zone. So look at those habits, and they mostly have to do with relationships, movement, food, lack of environmental toxins, right? And vocation, stress. Those are the big ones. Now, NAD is a good way to fix all this stuff, but all I'm urging people is to think about, you don't have to be sick. You don't have to mask it. Let's have habits and your DNA will tell you what to prioritize in order to have that big home run in terms of what habits do I actually change,
Mhm.
right?
Okay. I can't. I can't, I mean, we're almost at an hour, but I still have questions. So I'm going to just go because a couple of people asked me to clarify some of these more well-known genes, what they mean. So COMT, GG, AA, I think it's AA, GG, and AG. So
Yep.
what does COMT mean?
So COMT is a gene that makes proteins to clear things. It clears your neurochemicals, it clears your hormone toxins, and it also is the tail end of methylation. So once you're finished methylating something and making it water soluble, COMT comes along and kind of carries it out the door, right?
Okay.
It sweeps out the garbage. So single genes don't have single purposes. They have multiple purposes for the most part. So the GGAGAA just means in each gene is thousands of letters long. And sometimes in a gene, there's a spelling mistake. In this specific location, it was supposed to be a T, but instead it's a C, or it was supposed to be an A and instead it's a G, right? So now you know that that gene is functioning a little bit different. And
Is
that's what,
that, sorry, is that what you mean by like a SNP, single
yeah,
nucleotide polymorphisms,
yeah.
right? Okay.
Yes. Now, when you say compt AG, you're saying that in that location, which is the location that everyone knows to look at, we already know it's called the RS number. So there's
Yeah.
RS locations. You look at that RS number, it's supposed to be an AA or AG, and people will argue on what they think it's supposed to be, right? But you have this instead. For example, you have the GG, which
Yeah.
means ultra fast clearance, which is good for hormones, can be good for neurochemicals depending on the context, right? Um, and is good for methylation. So that's what it means. So all we're saying is here's the version of the gene in the location where we know we're supposed to look. Now, there's two other types of variations, which most genetic companies don't look at. We do because they're really impactful. A SNP is a spelling mistake. There's also something called an insertion or deletion, which means that a paragraph is missing. Forget about a spelling mistake. There's a whole paragraph just gone. Or there's an extra paragraph. Now imagine the implication of that if a spelling mistake means so much. There's also something called a copy number variation, which means you don't even have the gene. It's missing. The entire 22,000 letters are not there, right? Or you have an extra copy of the gene, and this is happening for you in the glutathione pathway. The
Yeah.
GSPT1 gene, either mom or dad gave you a copy, and either mom or dad didn't give you. So you only have one of the two that you're supposed to have. So these are the variants we look at because they're much more impactful for some of the bigger pathways.
Now, you what I find really interesting is that I'll read somewhere that a COMT-GG person could be more predisposed to, I think I read ADHD, schizophrenia, all that stuff. But the thing that you guys do differently is you take that and you kind of look at the whole picture, not just the one snip,
Yes.
right?
That's been the big challenge with quote unquote genetics.
Yeah.
This is a science of trying to figure out what each gene does, but the body doesn't work like that. When I talked about dopamine, if I only told you about one of the steps, I couldn't possibly tell you the whole story. When I talk to you about hormones, if I only tell you how you metabolize progesterone and testosterone, that isn't enough. You need to first you need to understand biology. How does the body work? You then need to reverse engineer how each gene instructs each step along that path, right? Which means that it's a chain with one broken link, and the one broken link on its own doesn't mean enough, right? If I tell you about methylation, here's a common example: MTHFR, right?
Yeah, I
MTHFR.
was going to ask you about that one
Yeah.
actually.
This
Yeah.
is the gene that everybody talks about for methylation.
Yeah.
And you have a bad MTHFR, and people tell you you're a bad methylator. You have a good MTHFR, and you have a good methylator. Methylation, if I show you the methylation map, it'll make you dizzy.
Yes.
It's all these genes interconnected, doing all these little steps in this cascade, and MTHFR is just the central starring character. If I have the good MTHFR, but everything else is broken, that doesn't mean that I'm a good methylator. And if I have the bad MTHFR and everything else is doing really well, this probably doesn't matter that much. It does matter for some things, but in terms of overall methylation. And if you don't look at every step, you don't know where to intervene. Do I need more B12? Do I need more B9? Do I need a a sublingual under my tongue? Do I need to swallow it? Do I need adenosine? Do I need methylcobalamin? All these questions are answered by all the other genes that surround the MTHFR. So that's where you have to think more functionally, as opposed to this gene means this gene means this. And this is why people are so disappointed by genetics. It's like, it didn't change my life, because that's not the way the body works. They're interpreting it wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's like with everything. You can't look at one thing in isolation.
Yeah.
You have to look at the big picture. And that's, I think, the biggest thing that I've seen with my report is that it looks at the big picture. And that's why sometimes you can go and get your genetics done at ABC company and it'll look different than this company. It's all in how it's analyzed, right?
Yep, exactly. It's the insight. So the testing is all the same. Everybody will test for a gene and they'll tell you what version of what gene you have. What does
Yeah.
that mean? That can be highly variable on the interpretation. And and why do we do this is, again, coming from the outside, I saw this gap, which is that geneticists can tell you what the gene means, and functional medicine doctors can tell you how the disease happens, but these two guys don't talk.
Mm,
And so the functional medicine doctors say genetics don't work, and the geneticists say functional medicine doctors don't understand how the body works. So I realized what was missing is taking all of this genetic science and applying it to actual problems in a clinic and fixing things. So we spent 3 years with 7,000 patients, one by one by one by one, anecdotally solving their problem and then creating the insights. Just like when we talked about breast cancer and the avatar, it wasn't about a gene, it was about a profile. Let's figure out the profile, and we keep seeing this profile repeated. Now, what equals its problems and what equals the benefits? That's the epigenetics that happens. So that way of thinking is more sort of wholesome, holistic, as opposed to genetics and medicine are separated. There's something in the middle, right? And that's what we built, which is functional genomics.
I love it. I mean, this is just life in general. You can't put a blanket statement on one thing. Like I know, and it's so funny because people are like, "Oh my god, you're taking 5,000 IUs of vitamin D in the summer?" I'm
Yeah,
like, "Yeah, I know my genes."
yeah,
Right? Like I know that I have a tough time absorbing vitamin D. I think I
yep.
have 3 SNPs, right? 3 SNPs that
Yeah, so for vitamin D, it's the most complex micronutrient pathway, which is there's a gene that takes D2 from the sun and converts it to D3, step
yeah,
one. Then you need to transport it to the cell, step two, another gene. Then when it gets to the cell, you need to bind it. And this is the only micronutrient that has this cascade, because too much is toxic. It can create calcification issues and other, so your body needs to be able to manage not only how much you get, but how do you deliver it. And so some people that ancestrally spent a lot of time in the sun don't, they may metabolize it well, but they maybe don't transport and bind it so well, right? And so all of a sudden, not only do you need 5,000 IU, but you might need to take it twice a day because you don't transport and bind. So the 5,000, you only actually got 1,500 into the cell,
yeah.
right? So we can be a lot more precise on dosing, frequency, etc. But vitamin D is the most complex of all the micronutrients.
So interesting. I find it really, really interesting. Now, okay, I think we covered a lot. Like, is there so I want you to explain the process just so that people get it. Like, in turn I've heard this so many times, Kashif, like people are like, "Oh, I'm not sending out my DNA. Forget that." I'm like, "You think that people don't already know everything about you because of technology? You're living in a dream world." But anyway, explain your process, your security, privacy, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so first of all, that concern is real with some companies that are really just in the business of selling your data. There's some infotainment level test up front, and the real customer is the buyer, the pharma customer in the background, right? So first of all, we're not in that business. We don't sell data. It's all anonymized, private, etc. We are in the inside business. We want you to work with us as a patient. So it's not about selling data. It's about supporting you ongoing long term. So the process is simple. Order a test, spit in a tube gets shipped back to our lab. The DNA is extracted and sequenced. You then log into a portal which shows you all of the problems we were talking about: hair loss, diabetes, anxiety, all of these things. And you can then use that data to interpret for other problems too. We actually teach you through an AI how your genes work, so you can start to think about it in other contexts. If people need clinical support, we do have a team. We have MDs, naturopaths, PhDs, whoever you need on our team to solve whatever problem you're trying to solve, from a phone call to a many month program, depending what we're dealing with, right? We also understand that some people want to dive deeper, but don't necessarily need clinical supports. We have ongoing webinars and events, etc., that people can come learn about hormones or learn about their brain, and they just keep getting more insights out of the reports. To show up with your data in hand and learn how to use it. So that's kind of how it looks like. You don't have to have any concerns about data privacy. It's in our terms. We're not that business. In fact, because we made a purposeful decision to actually deal with chronic disease and aging, we're not testing for the genes that the data buyer wants. They want all the disease markers. We're not interested in that stuff. We don't believe that's what genetics is for. So we don't even have data that's sellable, right? We focused on the 100 genes that matter as opposed to the 20,000 that are nobody really knows what they do yet, right? So we're not in that business. So that's kind of how it works. In fact, I should also mention that I want to honor everybody's time for listening and learning. And if this is something they value, which is why they're here, don't go to the website and pay retail. We'll offer you some kind of code to get a discount. I just want to extend that to whoever's here, right?
Yeah,
Uh, I'm wondering, because I'm literally on the fly just thinking of this. Maybe we'll make it the dnacompany.com/Sandy K.
sure. Sounds good.
And that way, use that link instead of the direct website to save a little bit of money. So it's the
Yep.
dnacompany.com/Sandy K, and I'll make sure that's set up right away.
Perfect. I'm going to actually put that in the show notes as well, for sure. And I can say from personal experience, I mean, it is a tool, and you're not kind of left hanging, just like Kashif was saying. You know, I have an entire section on longevity. Like, if that's my goal, that I want to look at longevity. There's a whole section on longevity, which I thought was really, really cool. And you're doing things differently, which is neat.
Yeah, that's our intention, is to give people what they were seeking. Mine my DNA and tell me everything I need to know so I
Yeah.
can live longer with good health. That's the intention, right? That's what
Yeah.
we do.
It's a blueprint, right? And you just got to follow it, guys. Like, you got to follow it. Like, follow my rule. I'm always like 80/20. I'm never about, well, there's certain things that are definite no's for
Yeah,
me, like smoking. Like,
yeah,
no. No,
yeah.
no, no. But I mean, I'm always about living balance, not 50/50, but maybe 80% of the time really, really good, quote unquote. 10, 20. In the summer, it's always a little bit more 80/20, for sure. For sure. For
Yeah,
sure. But this has been an amazing conversation, Kashif. I loved meeting you, and I can't wait to meet you in the fall in person. We're going to meet in person at the Biohacking Congress,
I'll see you there.
and I'm so looking forward to that.
It'll be a pleasure. Yeah, and unless I see you down the street, because apparently we're not far from each other.
We're almost neighbors. It's just so funny, but it's great. Thank you so much, Kashif.
Pleasure. Good talking to you.
Okay, I hit stop on the audio and the video.